Hello and welcome back to The Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi. Today is 14th of November and following are the articles that have been picked for analysis from the Hindu and Indian Express. So in the first section, you will learn two articles of importance in great details. First is what is Bulldozer Justice and how Supreme Court recently has made a historic judgment to prevent bulldozer justice in India. Second, what are domestic systematically important banks, which are also known as the too big to fail banks, and how RBI selects these. Then in the section 2, we will simplify 5 other important articles for you. So by the end of this discussion, you will have your prelims pointers, handout for revision and quiz for active recalling. On this note, let's start with the first topic. So students, the main highlight of the day is Supreme Court's judgment on prevention of bulldozer justice in India. You all must have already heard of it. Many memes on JCB stepping onto somebody's property or to anybody for whom the political party is not in favor of. You could have seen those memes going very viral very frequently, and this is not a very uncommon sight in India where anywhere, wherever the justice needs to be delivered, generally is delivered in the hands of bulldozer. Okay, so this bulldozer justice is a problematic situation. So what Supreme Court recently has said that, quote unquote, executive can't become judge, which means they are highlighting a fact that there is a breach of separation of power, the very essential doctrine, the basic structure doctrine under the Indian Constitution, that the executive cannot overstep into the function of judiciary and decide if a person is guilty or not. And this way, Supreme Court has slammed the demolition of properties of the accused and issued very strict directives which are establishing now the due process of law which has to be followed by the authorities before approaching any demolition of any property. Okay, so which syllabus part does it correspond to? Very clearly it is talking about the separation of power under GS2. Now this is a very important concept and a very interesting one as well. We all already know about bulldozer justice, but let me define it for you. So this is an uncommon controversial practice which is practiced by the state authorities across many states in India, especially across the BJP ruling belts, where to deliver the justice, especially in the cases of people who are accused of severe criminal offences, for example, communal violence, for example, rapes, for example, cow slaughter, or anything else. In that case, the state authorities take these accused and their properties and then use heavy machineries like bulldozers to demolish them. So this is how they are trying to deliver the justice in front of the Janta. Okay, and this is the practice of bulldozer justice. But the problem over here is, first question is, can't state authorities do this? If some property is really illegal and shouldn't be there, then they of course have the right. But the problem is that they do not follow the very principle of due process of law. The rule of law is violated time and again, and this is a main point of concern. And therefore, first of all, you cannot assume somebody as a guilty unless it is charged guilty by the judiciary, not by the executive. So in the case of accused people, when they are only accused of the criminal offense, their properties cannot be demolished, and even if any property has to be demolished, has to be followed under or has to follow certain due process of law. Are you getting the point? So now I'll tell you what is the background. So multiple pleas have been filed under Supreme Court, and Supreme Court recently has made its judgment under and exercising the power of Article 142, which grants the extreme power of Supreme Court to deliver complete justice in about any cases which are transferred to it. So, practicing this power, Supreme Court has recently published guidelines and also made severe remarks against the state government who follows the principle of demolishing of properties as a punitive measure against not the convicts but against the accused. Okay, the recent cases, the very recent, you already know about the UP cases, Rajasthan cases, but the recent ones have been in Ratlam, MP and Udaipur, Rajasthan. So what has happened in Ratlam, I'll just try to put in some context for you to get the clarity. So a person was arrested in fact for slaughtering the cow in June. So his entire family, his entire ancestral house was bulldozered over. Okay, now second one is in the Udaipur. It was observed that a particular person was arrested for stabbing his classmate from another community. So this this actually started the communal clashes over there, and then the state authorities went to his house and demolished the house, alleging them that they have encroached upon a forest land. And all of this is not having any due process of law in its cognizance, in its procedural implementation, and that is the issue. In fact, there have been certain cases. You must have heard about the Kangana Ranaut's home demolition case in Mumbai. So in Maharashtra, the demolition of actor turned politician Kangana Ranaut's bungalow in the Pali Hill, that was also there because she made some striking remarks for comparing the city with Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So state authorities did this action. And then in the Haryana, the new communal violence took place last year. It was a very heavy communal clash, and that also resulted into many bulldozer actions performed by the state authorities into the riotous houses. So this was also taken into regards by the Supreme Court. But we will see how this particular judgment is different from the previous Supreme Court judgments made on the similar Bulldozer Justice. Okay, so I hope this diagram also suggests to you that how the justice delivery is now done by taking bulldozer on your hand. Okay, so let's first look into the guidelines that have been issued by the Supreme Court in this particular judgment. The whole idea is to exercise the power under Article 142, safeguard the human right, the violated human right, violated fundamental rights, violated basic structure of the Constitution, the basic doctrines of the Constitution in various ways, and eventually create a framework which creates a due process of law, which creates a rule of law, which has to be followed by all the authorities across the states. Now, the guidelines issues, first of all, mandates a notice period. This was already issued by the previous Supreme Court judgment as well. We'll be looking into it. But this one particularly prescribes that there should be a minimum 15-day notice to the property owner, or in case of lack of property owner, then the occupier, current occupier. They have to be notified in 15 days advance. Then they must outline the reasons for taking out the decision of demolition, and then immediately schedule a personal hearing. Personal hearing of whom? The property owner or the occupier. After this hearing is done, arguments presented by the owner, argument presented by the state authorities, all of them must be documented, and then only the final order should be made of demolition as a last resort. Okay, then what should happen after post order? So after the post order of demolition, a 15 days of time will be there again. In this time, the person can either remove the structure. If it is an illegal, invalid structure, then the owner themselves can remove the structure, or they can appeal in the court. And meanwhile, recorded video of the demolition should be captured by the state authorities, and there should be preparation of an inspection and demolition report as well, which they should be depositing to the court. So these are the guidelines which will finally declare the rule of law that we have with respect to demolition of structures in India. But are we not already having demolition laws and demolition protocols? Yes, but it varied from state to state. We will see how. So in Rajasthan, the serving of the notice was the first mandate. The grounds of confiscation needed to be declared, and they were also allowed a chance of representation. But the rest of the things, hearing, final order, all of these post-order demolition process, they were not followed up there. Okay, next, in MP, you will see that according to MP Municipalities Act, the unauthorized construction can only be demolished after serving notice to the owners. But then chance of representation, all of that is not detailed in MP. In UP, you will see while they offer the minimum notice period of 15 days and the owner also can appeal in the court, but once it is finalized, once the order is made, then they cannot be further contested in the court. Now this you can see is getting defined in the current directive. They are saying that they can again appeal in the court in the post-order process. Okay. Next, in Delhi, you can see that there is a very vague definition that there will be given reasonable opportunity for the owner to appeal, but there is no fixed timeline as to under which timeline they should be producing their notice or should be going to the court. Next, in Haryana, similar protocol of Delhi is followed, but with a shorter period of time. So they are just giving you a 3 days window to comply with the demolition order. So in just these 3 days, you have to go and reshift yourself and you have to rehabilitate somewhere else. So these are the variability across the guidelines. And we are seeing that this is more prominent across the states which are in the Hindu belt, right? So what are the concerns with regards to bulldozer justice in India? Can you see this? Can you see this infographic? It suggests that Ideally, what should happen is there is a crime, then we collect the evidence for it, and then we deliver the punishment. This is one of the essential legal doctrines. But now what is getting followed, especially with bulldozer justices, first they commit the crime. Okay, they are just an accused. Immediately they are delivered the punishment, maybe in the form of mob lynching, maybe in the form of bulldozer thrown over their house, and then in order to finally declare them as convict, evidences are planted against them. So just imagine how brutally we are ravaging the justice system in the country. And one such tools are bulldozer justice. So first of all, it impinges upon the rule of law. It violates the very rule of law. When the laws are different for everybody, then in that case, it breaches the trust of the people on the institution that is set up by our forefathers, on the institution of democracy. Because if law is different for everybody, then it will lead to an authoritarian state. So therefore, violation of rule of law, where demolition is happening without serving proper advance notices, without giving them the right to representation, which is already told by the Supreme Court in multiple cases. If it is not followed, then the rule of law, if it is breached, then it equates to violation of law or having no law at all in that particular case, right? Next is violation of the very basic fundamental right. Think about it. When you're given the Article 21, it's not just giving you right to life and liberty, but also giving you an overwhelming right to shelter. So when, without giving proper notice, without following due process of law, if your property, even if it is illegal, if it is demolished abruptly, then eventually it is rendering you, it is taking away from you the very basic right to shelter that is under Article 21. So it violates fundamental right, it violates the rule of law, it also violates the legal ethos of principle of presumption of innocence, which means that any person who is accused of a crime is declared innocent till he is finally declared to be guilty by the court, not by the executive, not by the parliament, but by the judiciary, right? So it also violates this very principle of presumption of innocence. Second, it also causes specific targeting of the minorities. According to the Amnesty International report, it recorded that 128 properties that were destroyed between April and June of 2022 mostly were owned by Muslims. And in fact, in the recent cases, we'll be looking into some cases, you will see that the houses of minorities, the houses of some religious communities were more often selected for demolition, right? Therefore, when it is violating rule of law, it is not respecting your fundamental right, it is becoming authoritarian in nature. So this gives a very good right of state to become authoritarian. So anybody who's expressing dissent against the state, they have the right to then put a bulldozer on their house or property. So are you getting how it compromises with so many basic ethos and principles of our constitution and democracy, and also it breaches the very important basic structure of separation of power, where the executive is trying to overstep into the function of judiciary by trying to deliver justice, right? So these are the concerns. Some observations that have been made by Supreme Court in these cases, bulldozer justice cases, have been as follows in this chronology. So the Menka Gandhi versus Union of India case in 1978, it said that the executive procedures that are followed must be fair, just and reasonable. It is not giving you any solid definition as to what should be the notice period and what should be the time of going to the court, but they are just telling that it should be fair, just and reasonable. But this definitely forms a very solid ground for the judiciary to give as a reason for the upcoming, for the successive cases, right? Next is the Municipal Corporation of Ludhiana versus Inderjeet Singh case. Remember this one, where Supreme Court said that no authority can proceed with the demolition without two things. First is providing notice, and second, providing the right of being heard to the occupant. Therefore, in most of the directives that we have seen, we will see a common thing, the providing of notice and providing of right to be heard, except for in the case of Madhya Pradesh government. Next is the Olga Tellis versus Bombay Municipal Corporation case. And this one also said that there is a necessity to establish a due process, and without giving notices, you are violating the right to livelihood, which is secured under which article? Article 21 of the Constitution, which also provides the right to shelter. Next is the Punjab and Haryana High Court intervention during the new demolitions. That time also the court said that there should be a due process of law, which is currently lacking into the system. So when the Supreme Court made current guidelines, it ensured the following things. First of all, that the adjudicatory power, that is decision-making power, should only be handled by the judiciary and not by any other wing of the government, right? So separation of powers should be maintained in order to balance out the basic doctrine of basic structure. Next is, we should try to do all these things finally to uphold the public trust and ensure transparency into the system. Otherwise, public will become very enraged because of the actions taken by the government. Next is, we should also ensure that human right, the very basic human right and the fundamental right of right to shelter is ensured. So, Supreme Court, when made the judgment, ensured the following doctrines. Next, what should be the further way forward? So while Supreme Court has made certain guidelines, Supreme Court is still lacking on some of the grounds. First of all, it has not told anything about what can be done for the cases which have already been demolished illegally. So there are no remedies provided for the previously affected communities, and individuals and their properties. So there is no resolution for them, and then Supreme Court has not made any guidelines for rehabilitation and restitution as well. So what finally should be the way forward? It should be multi-pronged. First of all, it should be implemented in staged manner. One is the pre-demolition phase. Here, the burden of proof of demolition should lie upon the authorities as to why are they doing it, do they have solid backing around it, will they provide enough evidences around it, and not on the convict, not on the accused person, not on the property owner, right? Second is, whether there should be demolition at all or not should not be just decided by one person or one organ of the government, but by an independently working committee, which would be comprising of the judicial members and the civil society members as well. Okay. Next is, during demolition, there should be least terror and least use of force that should be there. So which means there should be no terror and no force. Minimization of force means that heavy machineries, a lot of machinery should not be deployed. It will threaten the people around it, and it should also not be using high-handedness of the state authorities. Next is, official presence should be ensured so that one person can be set accountable for the entire demolition process. Next is, scheduled timing should be there, which means surprise demolition is the worst thing that one can imagine, right? You can't imagine, I can't imagine, and therefore scheduled timing, there should be a proper timing which is delivered under the notice to the property owner so that they are also ready, they are also rehabilitated, and then only this should be done. And finally, after post-demolition, there should be considerations about how the people who have been moved will be rehabilitated. So they should be either getting provisions of temporary settlements or permanent settlements depending upon their conditions, or there should be grievance redressal mechanism where they can reach out to the court again, and there should be remedies, for example, remedies of restitution, again their rehabilitation, and ensuring their other social economic parameters are strengthened, right? So these are some of the way forwards which have to be implemented in a phased manner. Okay, this will finally deliver the justice that we are seeking, which is not bulldozered. Okay, and here is a question for you which you can try to attempt, and almost all the content that we have read till now will be very helpful in solving this one. So try to attempt it, try to see how you are good in and how good you are getting in developing a structure of answer. Okay, and now the next topic is about the too big to fail banks, because recently what has happened, RBI, the Central Bank of India, has maintained that the existing 3 too big to fail banks will again be getting the same classifications of domestic systematically important banks. So actually what I mean by this is, the banks which are categorized as domestic systematically important banks are also considered as the too big to fail banks, and therefore their regulations are a little more stricter, their norms that they have to follow is again little more stricter as compared to rest of the banks. Okay, why is the need? How did it evolve? We will look into it. First of all, please understand how Indian banking system is different from the other banking system. See what happened in 2008, a very major global financial crisis happened. You all know about it, how the Lehman Brothers clashed. this was a major bank, major corporate institution there in USA. When it collapsed, it also caused financial crisis across the various economies. It also impacted Indian economy, not to the great extent, but the other economies were completely shattered, especially the Canadian, the European economies, which had quick engagement with this particular bank. So just imagine, when one bank fails, it is disrupting the entire global economy. And this is further aggravated because we are more interconnected now, because we are more globalized now, right? So in 2008, one phenomena was also seen where the Indian domestic banks showed higher signs of strength and resilience against the disrupting and the falling out economies of the world. The reason for this is how our banks are structured and how their balance sheets are maintained. So if you talk about and if you compare our balance sheets or our banks with the foreign banks, with the Western banks specifically and the Indian banks, you will see that in our balance sheet, most of the money is held by not the corporates but by the individuals. Right? So we accumulate, our banks are mostly accumulating the household savings. What are we accumulating? Mostly the household savings. Of course, we have corporate saving as well, but mostly the majority of it is the household saving. On the other hand, if you see the foreign banks, more than 60% of their savings are coming from the corporates. But what happens with corporates? The moment they feel that their trust on economy is shaking out, they will try to have a ripple impact upon the entire economy by evacuating their money from the banks. The moment a lot of corporates get driven to evacuate their money from the bank becomes in deficit. This causes bank run. And this also causes issues with the other debts that the banks have given, the other equities that the bank is holding or the debts that the bank has given. This also loses people's trust on the entire economy. So this is how, when we have a lot of corporates saving in one particular bank, saving that bank becomes very important, because if corporates goes out, then this bank will fall out. And if this bank is really important for the economy, that economy will fall out. If that economy will fall out, and especially an economic giant like USA, the other smaller economies dependent on USA like India, like UK, like Australia, like New Zealand, they will also fall out. Right? This is not so in the case of India, because mostly our savings are held by households. So households are not very quick. They are more trustworthy. They don't take that hasty decision based on economies, right? We still have got, even if we know recession might be coming, we still will be having our money in the bank, right? We won't be evacuating it that quickly. Therefore, Indian banks are more resilient. But of course, we have to take our learnings from the Lehman Brothers case, right? Therefore, we have also created certain classification of banks which needs to be safeguarded more than the other operational banks of India. Okay, so the other things that you observe in India is we are mostly cluttered up and we are actually blessed to have a lot of public sector banks and some of the other important corporate giants who also act very responsibly. For example, the HDFC, ICICI, etc. And then we have a very active government and regulator, which is SEBI and RBI. They are very active. You see every fortnight, every 15 days, some action taken up by SBI or by SEBI or RBI to secure the financial and the insurance market of country, right? So we are blessed in that regard, that we are more secure from the other nations. So, but we understand the importance of creating banks or safeguarding banks, or at least earmarking some banks as more important than the other banks of the country. These banks are known as systematically important banks, and these are not just designated in India as such. In fact, after the global financial crisis of 2008, in 2011, the country started taking up measures in order to ensure that the systemic risk involving the fallout of a bank can be reduced. And this is especially for those banks which are too big to fail, which means they hold too much money in themselves. So if they fail, they will also create a ripple effect on the economy. The economy will start failing. These are earmarked as the systematically important banks. The first classification is the globally systematically important banks. Okay, so they have been declared by the Financial Stability Board in 2011 along with the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. We know that what Basel reforms does, it ensures that the regulations, the standardization of the regulations and the security of the banks against systemic risk and the market overflows is also safeguarded. End of the day, just please remember that FSB and Basel Committee came together to create or to designate certain banks globally as the globally systematically important bank. If one of them fall out, the entire nation would fall out, and in fact it will have ripple effect onto other economies. Can you name some examples? So for example, we have JP Morgan, we've got Goldman Sachs. So these are some of the globally systematically important banks. We have 30 of them. No Indian bank is enlisted into a globally important bank, right? Next one is for the insurance sector. So we have got certain systematically important insurance companies as well. They are again safeguarded and enlisted by the Financial Stability Board only, and along with collaboration of International Association of Insurance Supervisors, they maintain the list of international insurers. Next is the domestic systematically important bank. Now who will decide it? The norms, of course, will be laid down. The frameworks will be laid down, of course, by the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. Where is it headquartered? Can you tell me in the comment section, students? Where is it headquartered, the Basel? So, if you know that, then I'll proceed with it. That it created a framework in 2014 telling guidelines to different countries how you can create your own domestic systematically important banks. So India also followed it, and who will be creating this list in India? RBI, the Central Bank of India, correct? So these are considered as very important banks, first on the basis of their size, okay? Second is their interconnectedness with the rest of the world. Then is their substitutability, which means they lack substitutability. There cannot be any other bank like SBI in India. Okay, we will take a lot of time to create that substitute. So therefore, in the lack of substitutability, it becomes very important. And also the complexity in its procedure, complexity in its operation. Why? Because it is holding a lot of people's money, a lot of institutions and intergovernmental money, and therefore there is complexity in its working as well. So for now, we have only 3 banks in India designated as the DSIBs. Okay. Now, can you see here that the additional common equity tier 1 requirement as a percentage of risk weighted asset is different for all of them. It is 0.8% for SBI, it is 0.4% for HDFC, and it is 0.2% for ICICI. Ma'am, what is this, and why do we have only 5 such categories? I will tell you now the procedure, how a particular central bank assigns a bank as systematically important bank. See, first of all, in order to ensure the safety and security of the banks against any bank run scenario, the Basel norms have led one particular concept, which is of maintaining a CAR or capital to asset risk ratio, which means the amount of total capital that a bank holds. What is the capital of a bank? One is the equity that it holds, second is the debt that it gives. Okay, these two are the overall capital of the bank. Now let's say the capital of the bank is 20 lakh rupees. Okay, now out of which they might be holding certain assets. They might be holding certain assets, for example, government bonds, government securities, house loans, auto loans. So all the loans that the bank gives are actually their asset. They'll be getting interest in return. It's an asset. Whatever savings they hold, all of that are their liabilities. Okay, this concept is clear, I hope. So all of these assets are risk weighted because their risks are different. So as you can see that government securities have got the least risk, only 10%. Auto loans will be, because automobile industry is very fluctuating, so it will be having more risk percentage ratio, right? So can you see that when these categories are multiplied with their risk weights, and when all of them are added together, it gives us the total risk weighted assets of a bank, which according to the Basel III norm should be maintained for about 9% for almost all the banks. For all the banks, they should be having the CAR ratio of 9%, which means that this bank is operational in a healthy way. Now, in the case of systematically important banks, they have to go a little overboard. They have to ensure a little bit more as compared to the normal operational banks. How? So, in their case, they are divided into 5 buckets, which means under 5 classifications. Now, if any bank, first of all, I'll tell you what kind of size is required for a bank to become systematically important. It is one which holds a capital of about 2% of the total GDP or more than 2% of the total GDP of the nation. If a bank is holding this much of the capital, then it is considered as a systematically important bank. Now in this also, we have got 5 classification. Okay? A 5 classification, please understand, there are different norms that have to be followed, different equity ratio that they have to maintain, additional to 9%. 9% everybody has to maintain. But in the case of let's say HDFC, ICCI and SBI, there are differential rate. HDFC and ICCI are rated under bucket 1, which means they are very, very important. So bucket 1 will be having an additional CAR of 0.15%, which means 9 plus 0.15% CAR should be maintained by bucket 1, which are HDFC and ICCI, right? Then 0.45% should be maintained by SBI, which means 0.45 plus 9% CR should be maintained by SBI, which is more than what is maintained by normal banks. I hope it is clear to you. And SBI is under bucket 3. So which means what is a bucket 5? This is a bucket 5, this is bucket 4, bucket 3, bucket 2 and bucket 1. Can you see why these 5 classifications were made? Are you able to relate it to now? And the higher the bucket number, the higher is its importance for the economy. So far now, the most important bank for the country is SBI, followed up by HDFC and ICICI. Got it? Clear to you? Now, we will tell you what is domestic systematically important bank. So first of all, something which is highly integrated, has cross-jurisdictional activities, which means it's got operational branches in different countries of the world, possesses a very complex financial structures, offers a lot of financial products, and they are very essential for the economy. They are so essential that if they fall, the economy falls, and therefore they are too big to fail. Okay, too big to risk upon. So what is the requirement for them? They need to maintain something known as common equity tier 1 capital. So the capital that they need to maintain should be about 0.20% to 0.80% of the risk weighted assets. Okay. So you know about SBI, we've already seen in these cases how much do they need to maintain. Fine. Now to further build on the concept, let's quickly see how RBI selects a particular bank. So it takes a sample of bank. Not all of the banks are taken. There's a certain criteria because there's a lot of documentation process required. So RBI doesn't require all of the banks to perform documentation. Otherwise, their operational processes will get slowed down. So the sample of banks to be assessed is taken. The sample is pretty small and then they analyze their sizes. Sizes on the basis of leverage ratio. Leverage ratio is what? How much amount of equity and how much amount of debt is given by the bank. So which means this is the total liability. This is the total liability of the bank, and this is the total asset of the bank. So how much are you giving as compared to how much is your asset holding? Okay, this is the leverage ratio, and so on the basis of this exposure, which is different from all the bank, it decides that how much equity is it holding as a percentage of the GDP of the country. If it is more than 2%, then in that case it is considered as systematically important bank. Okay, and then they also calculate a composite score of the systematic importance. On what parameters? Their interconnectedness, we read it, size, their complexity of management operations, etc. Okay. The step 2 is then to segregate them into buckets. So if they have a lower capital charge, they will be having a lower bucket rank, 0, 1, 2, right? And if they are having a higher capital charge, higher capital is holding by them, which for example is SBI for us, then they will be given a higher bucket rank like 4 and 5. Fine. Now, why is it considered essential to establish these SBI? So far now, you must have understood why is it important for us to safeguard these banks. In very clear words, if they fail, the economy fails, and because we are interconnected, it can also lead to global financial crisis, in very simple words. But for UPSC point of view, see, first of all, it ensures financial stability. So that's something like a Lehman Brothers collapse doesn't repeat itself because we are securing our most important banks there. Next is, it minimizes the systemic risk. Systemic risk is very important to be managed because it creates domino impact in the other economies. See, a lot of companies must have taken debt, must have taken loans from this bank, and if this bank fails to pay off the loans, or if these companies again fail off to pay the loans back to the bank will fail. If the bank is not able to perform well, then the other companies will not be getting their investments. They will not be getting their liquidity, right? So this will fail the entire economy. So the systemic risk involved with these banks, this will be minimized. Second is, it gives the power to the regulator, for example RBI, to perform more supervision and regulation on them, because they more often than not take their position for granted that they are the big giants, so they can exploit the market. But this, when they are inducted into this bracket, they are given more sense of responsibility to have a better, to have a more margin of capital ratio, and then they also need to ensure that they follow certain regulations and supervisions which are given by the RBI. Next is, it gives better access of financial support during the crisis because it saves these banks. It ensures it increases the market confidence, the people's confidence on a particular economy. Let's say if China is failing, then the entire FIS will flow away from China and come back to India, right? So this will also attract our market investment. And then finally, it will help us to encourage sustainable growth practices so that the bank's economies are not just growing on current pace, but they will also sustainably grow in the future as well. With this, we will have a question for you and we request you to attempt that. Okay. Now we will be simplifying the 5 other articles for you very, very quickly. So stay tuned with me. Now here is an editorial. This was featured as the green transition for India. So we already know that the COP is going on in Baku, Azerbaijan, right? Now there a lot of talks about climate finances and how to manage it is going on. But this article very beautifully discusses how the green transition towards a greener energy should be made. So first of all, it tells us that India, as we are trying to negotiate, India will have to decarbonize equitably. That is the first intention we have, the first goal that we have to achieve. And second, to also attract the climate finances to drive the investment. So we have these 2 goals. So how to ensure that we are doing it and how to sustainably do it? Because we have got a huge power market, especially in the terms of demand. You can see here that the power demand will nearly double by the end of this decade. Do you know how much? 370 gigawatt would be required by 2031 and 32. Currently, we have something about 170 gigawatts. So just imagine the kind of increase in power demand which we are going to face. So here, what is the need of the hour? We definitely need to increase our power creation, but that has to be done sustainably. That has to be done in a greener manner, which means what is required? Green transition of the power sector. But then students, what do you mean by green transition? Is it just installing of the greener installation, greener capital or greener power projects as compared to the previous thermal power plants? No. It is just the top line of what you are seeing. Okay, top line of the mountain. There is much more beneath that. Green transition should be one which is again sustainable, which means there should be something which is taking care of the economy, which is taking care of the environment, which is taking care of the energy transition, and at the same time keeps people at the center. Now this is something which we call as a greener transition towards a greener economy. Okay, so in order to achieve this, the author suggests us to perform 7 strategic shifts. What are these? Hear me out. First of all, is transition from centralized to decentralized energy system. How do you get the power in your house currently, students? How are you getting it? Through some transmission line which is being operated by some state electricity board, which is getting its electricity from where? From some thermal power plant, some coal power plant, right? So it is heavily centralized. Now what is required is that we create decentralized power plants. How to do it? Is there any form of green energy which can be harvested at decentralized level? Yes, sunlight. So solar rooftops can be installed in all the plants. In fact, it is stipulated by the author that if 10 million houses are installed with solar energy, this will help India to produce 30 gigawatt worth of green energy for the future. And this is a very good step, but the limitation is that it becomes quite expensive for the lower income group to install the solar power plants. So the solution that is suggested, why can't we go for community-based power plants? So community-based solar power plant is something that comes out of the application of the first principle, which is to create decentralized energy system so that we all become self-reliant in power generation and consumption. Second is shifting from capital expenditure method to operational expenditure model, which means currently if a discom provider is setting up, or let's say if a service provider is setting up a power plant, they will charge you the money for the entire capital expenditure that has been incurred on him. But what they are suggesting is, don't charge us on the basis of your capital that you are creating or that you have created to provide the power. Just charge us on the units of the power, which means Let's work on a pay and go model, which means somebody is setting up a solar roof power for me, a solar rooftop plant for me on, let's say, a community basis. This is, let's say, a utility vehicle has created this for me. Now, they should not be charging me for the installation of this capital. They should be charging me on the amount of power this is bringing to me, so that it becomes more justifiable for me also and for them also, right? So the better you are working, the more you're operational, the better I'm giving you money, right? So we should be moving away from capital expenditure towards the operational expenditure. This can be used for the mobility also, mobility, transport, etc., right? Second is to prioritize the investments which are climate resilient and low risk, which means, let's say I'm installing a power plant in a very cyclone prone area and I have not done the proper risk assessment. What will happen? This entire capital investment of mine, which has been given for installment of the power, for installment of the power plant, will be destroyed in a second by the cyclone. Why? Because proper risk assessment was not done. Second, climate resilience was not seen. So the areas have to be analyzed on a granular level on the basis of different codes of climate resilience and the other risk assessment of their geography, and then only investment should be made, which means more mindful, conscious, climate friendly investment should be made. Correct? Next, integrate into the global clean energy supply chain. See, in order to produce the greener form of energy, for example, nuclear power plant, for example, the solar power plants, right? For example, the hydrogen power plants. What do we require? Essentially, we require silicon, we require photovoltaic cells, we would be requiring minerals like cadmium, which is not very readily available in my country. So why not I integrate myself with a global supply chain with the people who are providing me at a cheaper cost, right? Like, let's say, for example, China, let's say, for example, Australia, let's say, for example, Russia, etc., right? Azerbaijan has got huge reserves as well. So therefore, let us integrate into the global clean energy supply chain and not just over focus on becoming self-reliant on everything, right? Next is global collaboration over protectionism. Currently, what happens is, whenever a country creates any new technology regarding creation of green power, they become protectionist. They don't try to transfer that technology, transfer that knowledge. They don't try to integrate themselves into global power chain supply. So what they are asking is that there should be a global collaboration. Okay, so sharing of the resources should be there, sharing of technology should be readily there. This is again a principle which should be followed. Next is unite decarbonization and digitalization. So we know that we are in the era of Industrial Revolution 4.0. A lot of digital devices, lot of digital technologies, softwares have come in front of us. For example, AI, for example, Internet of Things, right? Digital sensors can be created. So can we not also create smart meters? So across multiple areas of power sector, in order to decarbonize them, can I not install the digital mechanics and modes and applications to make it more climate resilient, more power efficient, right? So for example, if this is creating softwares which can create an alarm that the system is failing so that the transmission losses doesn't happen, I can stop the grid there. Then something which can notify about the leakages, something which can notify about, let's say, smart meters can be there. Okay, so all of them requires digitization. So we should also incorporate digitization now into decarbonization. Next is transition to circular economy. This is interesting one. Circular economy means creating, producing and consuming in a way that no amount of waste is generated. Now what happens is, during in minerals factory, or let's say in the waste dump yards, you see a lot of critical minerals being thrown just like that. Especially seen in the case of electronic waste. So you see a lot of silicon, cadmium, these critical minerals over there. So why can't we use them and create our cells, our batteries using them only, so that they can power up the sustainable mode of energy for us, right? For example, the photovoltaic cells, for example, we can create a better solar rooftops with them. So circular economy can also be one principle to be followed to ensure transition. Next is place people at the center of the energy, which means currently what we are doing is we are focusing on producer financing, right? Which means if, let's say, a particular company is giving me more power, I will incentivize them more. But the adoption rate is still low because me as a consumer, I may not be getting that incentive to really purchase the electric vehicle, or to install the solar rooftops, or to purchase the smart meters for myself. Why? Because they're costlier. So why don't you subsidize them? Why don't you focus on adaptation of the greener energy as compared to production of greener energy? While both the things are important, the extreme focus, the center of everything, the center of the universe should be the energy, should be the people, so that there is more adaptation. This will create more demand for the industry. So creation of the greener product will then become more lucrative for the industry. Are you getting it? So if we follow these 7 principles, we will move towards a greener transition which is more sustainable in nature. How to do that? I've already told you, by incorporating these 3 principles of energy, environment, economy, keeping people at the center. Okay? Now here is a question, since I have already talked to you about the PV photovoltaic cells. So how does India perform in that regard has been something asked in UPSC 2020 in the prelims question. Okay. Now we will talk about a different, a very unique and a very interrelated kind of non-communicable health hazard which is prevailing across the country, especially in India. Let us see this. This is the CKM syndrome, also known as the cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome, which is growing at an alarming rate across the world, and this is coming as a price of modernity. So how the modern practices, how the modernization, the globalization has contributed to us generating these syndromes, and what can be the way forward. We'll quickly look into it. See, first of all, they will talk about what is the cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome, which has become a silent global killer, because what happens is it starts with one disease, not even a disease, it starts with one disorder, maybe let's say eating disorder, then it will make you obese, then it will lead to kidney failures, renal failures, heart stroke, hypertension, depression, it will lead to other metabolic dysfunctional diseases. So one thing is leading to many other diseases. So this is an actually integrated syndrome, and this is what the author is trying to put forward. Okay, so here this chain reaction will happen between multiple organs, failure of heart, kidney affecting liver, blood vessels, etc., leaving the patient to a very vulnerable case, and can also in some case cause premature death. Now, a special case study of Tamil Nadu can be seen in this regard. See, why they've taken Tamil Nadu is because, because of the healthcare facilities provided in that state. It is known for its strong public health framework, and not only that, it is also something that fares far better than the national average of us performing in obesity and mortality, life expectancy, and other things, right? So it is a better performer as compared to rest part of the country. Okay, and still we see that it is suffering heavily from this MKS syndrome. According to the Global Burden Disease Report, it starkly illuminates the fact that the NCDs account for 69% of the premature deaths and 68% of the total lost to disability. Now, while these things are happening in one of the best performing states of the country, just imagine the data, the alarming data that we'll get from the other states, for example, the UP, Bihar, West Bengal belt, etc., where we are very careless about our dietary practices. It also suggests to us, it also provides us with some other data. For example, the STEP survey of Tamil Nadu suggested the similar thing. I'm not going into the data, you can have it in the handout, but we are here to analyze that the body weight, the obesity can also eventually lead to hypertension, can lead to cancers, can lead to heart attacks, can lead to kidney strokes, can lead to renal failures. So many things are interconnected altogether. Now the problem, what happens is that it also accrues a lot of burden on the economy. It is suggested from the Tamil Nadu case study, it can only be seen that the total amount of expenses from the state budget that is given for curing the NCDs of the state is about $12 billion. Which is already a huge amount of money. So therefore, the current trends of rising obesity, diabetes, hypertension, they not only threaten the health budgets of the countries, but also the overall economy of the country, and also they threaten what we have envisioned in the United Nations SDGs, where we are seeking to reduce the NCD related death by 1/3. And for that, we would be requiring multiple intervention. The most important one would be to create integrated clinics. See, now when we've understood that everything is interrelated to each other and is creating a chain reaction, we need to break the chain by actually not treating all of them in silos separately, but treating all of them integratedly, right? So a shift from the segmented care to the unified care is the need of the hour suggested by the author. Then they also say that most of the money that is actually given in these cases is wasted, because a person which is multiple affected from multiple areas, multiple organs, needs to see separate specialists, take different appointments at different time, give a lot of money to so many people. So this is what is doing. This is not only causing loss in their wages, in their purchasing power, but also in their productivity, right? So having an integrated clinic would address these issues at a more holistic level, where there will be just one clinic having all of the doctors in one panel, where there will be a diabetologist, cardiologist, nephrologist, dietitian. All of them are working together in synchronity and creating a health plan for you, which will be taking care of your holistic health, right? So taking care of the holistic health is more important, is the focus which author is putting in this article. Okay, so what is the way forward? Creating integrated clinics. Now, one more thing that they have highlighted is how globalization has caused this. So globalization has given us a culture which is known as the long work hour and the night shift culture, which is also known as the gift of globalization. Here, we have idealized workaholism. We are dismissing rest as weakness. You are resting, which means you're so weak, your body is not active, your metabolism is not right. Okay, but actually it's a vicious cycle. Just because you're not getting rest, you're being workaholic over time. Therefore, you're also compromising with your metabolism, the rate at which body produces energy. And also you're compromising with the other areas of your body. For example, the hormone levels, the happy hormones, endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, etc. They get compromised. In fact, the stress regulating hormone cortisol is active in your body all the time. What cortisol does? It stops the overall metabolic activity, right? And therefore you become more obese. So everything is interrelated to each other. And therefore they also call upon the second thing, which is there should be policy changes with regards to work regulation. So work should be regulated. So not just the economy grows, but also economy lives longer and healthier and happier, right? They also suggest for the policy changes in the public distribution system. The salt that is there should be a low sodium salt. There should be more fortification of the rices and the oils, which is already seen. There should be inclusion of eggs, etc. Something which provides omega fatty acids, which is good for brain health. So this is also something which we need to incorporate in the public distribution system. Okay. So about prelims boosters, we have hypertension, then we have cancers, we have heart attacks, and then there is the diabetes, the type 1 diabetes and the type 2 diabetes. So all of these are the different forms of NCDs. Now, because of the paucity of the time, I will not be able to elaborate on it. I'm already speeding up a little bit, but I hope you will be able to capture it. If not, you can go to the Vajiram portal and have a good read on them. Okay, so these are what? These are non-communicable diseases. So one kind or the other. Okay, here is a question for you, and the question is given from UPSC Prelims 2019. Try to attempt this one and let me know the answer. This can be very easily solved with the help of common sense. All of the information, all of the knowledge is not required, so you just can try to attempt it with the help of common sense. Of course, I've provided the answer to you, so just try to see why the third statement is incorrect and try to justify that in the comment section. Okay, now another interesting news has come up. So what has happened is one pharmaceutical company, they were the maker of a magic weight loss drug. This was semaglutide. They want the copies of these drugs to be banned. Now, while this entire news is not very important, I'll just try to bring out the context for you. So what has happened? This company, which is very famously brought two great products in the industry, were breakthrough. One was the Wegovy, which was a weight loss drug, and second was Ozempic. Everybody knows about Ozempic these days. It's a diabetic medication, very effective ones. So the Danish pharmaceutical company which has created them, they actually created them using a generic medicine. The generic medicine was known as semaglutide. Okay. Now, looking into the multiple uses of semaglutide, they saw that a lot of companies started using semaglutide and then they used to combine it with some other drug and create something which we call as a compounded drug, and they were selling it into the market. But there were more harms than benefits out of these compounded drug creation, and therefore they have this company have went to the US Food and Drug Administration and wants them to regulate such such copies. Okay, one of the reasons that they have claimed is the poor bioavailability of the medication. So they said that the bioavailability, which is the degree to which an active ingredient in the drug reaches the bloodstream. If it does not reaches the bloodstream, it is actually rendered ineffective. Okay, so to make it effective, it should be combined with the right combination. For example, if somebody is consuming glutathione, so alone having glutathione won't help. They have to consume it using vitamin C. This will help in absorption. Similarly, you must have seen that in some cases you should be having haldi or you should be having ginger for better absorption of certain Ayurvedas, right? So similarly, the bioavailability will be compromised and it will not be absorbed properly if different copies without proper combinations are made. So this is why this company has asked the FDA to take a cognizance of the case. Now, I will tell you the basics now, which is what is the difference between a generic drug and a compounded drug. See, generic drugs are those which are mass produced. Okay, mass produced only when the patent on that brand name has expired. Okay, so for example, paracetamol is an active pharmaceutical ingredient, right? The generic drug could be, let's say, Crocin. Okay, so now, or Paracip. Okay, now Paracip would be under the patent for, let's say, 3 years. After the patent is over, it is now readily usable across the different countries by different brands, right? That is when it becomes a generic drug. So in the AIMS, etc., you must be seeing the generic drug. The generics means that it is not having any brand name. They are most cost effective as compared to the branded drugs. Okay, so what they use the same active ingredient, match branded version in dosage, the safety, quality, intended use, everything is same as compared to the main drug, right? Now, semaglutide was one of the generic drug only. Okay. Now, what is a compounded drug? Now, they are the actually synthetic drugs which are created using combination of multiple generic drug. Okay, so they are created by licensed pharmacists to meet specific patient's needs. So, what is the keyword over here? They perform customization. So, what they'll do, you will say that I am having fever and I am also having pain. Okay, so they'll give you something like a Nisep Plus. Okay, I'm not suggesting these medicine. Please don't take it on my prescription. Let's say they will give you a combination of Nisep Plus. How good is its bioavailability? How good it will be in my body? That is a different point of discussion. But the point is, this is not a generic drug. This is a compounded drug. It's a mix and match drug, right? So now we will compare further the regulations. So regulation for generic drugs are very strict actually. They are very strict. For example, they must prove the bioequivalence. That is, the same amount of active ingredient should be delivered in the body as that of the branded drug. Okay, please remember there is a branded drug, generic drug and compounded drug. Okay, now for compounded drug actually, because there's a lot of mix and match, it's not very easy to regulate each one of them. There could be 5,000 copies of one generic drug, right, out of different combinations. So therefore, they are not subjected to same rigorous approval process, and that is where the problem comes. Now, further in your prelims booster, I will be going further into details of generic and compounded differentiation. If you talk about availability, of course, because what is produced in mass, generic drugs, so it will be more widely available. What will be more cheaper? Of course, generic drug would be more cheaper because it is not having any license now. Now, regulation, both of them are regulated, but the regulation for generic drug is more as compared to the compounded drug. Okay, let's see some of the example. Generic drugs, what are the ones? Paracetamol, for example, the Dolo 650, Calpol, Paracet, etc. Metformin, these are all generic drugs. Okay, now there are compounded versions. Compounded versions would be one which has got some thyroid medication along with paracetamol, or one would be having some certain kind of pain relief cream, different for skin, different for scalp, different for let's say internal organs of the body, right? So this is how both of them are differentiated. So please be very careful on your understanding of what is a compounded drug and what is a generic drug. Okay, now here comes the second last article of the day. This is about the agriculture resources, their exports, and how to export something sustainably, and how India has been doing it so far. The article name is India's Tea Sugar Export Raise Sustainability Concerns at Home. Why is it doing so? First of all, let's see the performance of sugar and tea and how are we holding our grounds in terms of total global production and export. Tea, first of all. Tea, which is India's world's fourth largest tea exporter and second largest producer in the world. Okay, not first exporter, not first producer. You tell me which country is the first largest producer of tea in the world. Okay, now it contributes to the 10% of the total global exports. When it comes to domestic consumption, 80% of the total production that we have is actually given for domestic consumption, and the 20% is something that we do export globally. Okay, what is our standing with regards to sugar, which is produced by sugarcane? So India is world's second largest sugar producer, which is the first largest country. Very easy. You can tell me the name in the comment. Then the country exported sugar to 121 countries, and about 50 million farmers are dependent on sugarcane cultivation in the country. But there are certain challenges. See, what is happening is our export basket is full of these products of plantation agriculture, sugarcane, tea, etc. But growing them itself is not a very sustainable process. If you take into regards the cultivation of sugarcane, it is known for the worst water management ever, which means that it requires a lot of water to cultivate. On an average, it suggests that 1 kg, if you want to produce 1 kg of sugar, that requires 2000 kgs of water. Can you imagine how much water are you drinking when you are consuming 1 kg of sugar? So don't take it for granted. Next is, it requires to grow 25% of the total gross cropped area of sugarcane in the country. We require 60% of the total irrigation water. So it is a highly water surplus, water draining resource, not very sustainable thing to grow. And this is something which is giving us a lot of money because we are exporting it a lot. The more demand of exports will come, the more demand of sugar will come from India, the more burden of water exploitation will be there on our resources, which is again, it is not very easily replenishable, right? So this is the first problem. Second is the problem with tea plantation. So you can see that there are certain environmental challenges. Most of the tea plantations are there in the Western Ghats or there in these Himalayan foothills. So most of these places are actually somewhere in the border or somewhere in the transition zone between the pastures and the forest landscapes, which means there is highly likelihood of human-wildlife conflict taking place more than ever. So growing tea plantation is not very easy. Second is use of pesticide, because of which the chemical contamination of tea is higher than ever when it comes to India. And then there are labor concerns as well, because the labor exploitation is also one of the dominant issue that is highlighted in the tea industry. And second is, of course, sugar industry, which requires more land usage, higher water usage, drip irrigation potential is very less in sugar, right? And of course, there are labor concerns as well. Now, which of the state produces the largest amount of tea and which of the state produces the largest amount of sugarcane in India? We know that. Fine. So, we have analyzed the distribution of tea, sugar and how they are not very sustainable things to export. So, this article suggests that instead we should be focusing on producing more millets and creating products of millets using the food processing industry and building our export market around millet, which is a more sustainable crop, so that our further trade could become more sustainable, correct? And it will not drain our resources in the longer run. I hope this is clear to you. Here's a PYQ for you. We are asking for the tea producing states. You have to eliminate one and you will get the answer. Can I move to the next question? Yes. In this article, we will read how the African elephant count, who were actually pretty much good in number, now they are also decreasing at alarming rate, in fact at 90% rate. Why is it happening? Of course, because of poaching. This particular reason has been highlighted. There are so many other reasons, but we are reading it from the prelims point of view. So what is the point of concern for us is the species in use and how does it perform. So when we compare the elephants, the total species of elephants, we've got African elephants. In that too, we've got two species, the bush elephants or the savanna elephants and the elephant and the forest-based elephants. So there is African savanna elephant and African forest elephant. In the Asian elephants, we've got four kind of elephants. The smallest one is the Borneo pygmy elephant. Then we have Sumatran elephant, Sri Lankan elephant and Indian elephant. Okay. When we compare the IUCN status, we will see that the African savanna elephants are endangered, while the forest elephants are critically endangered because they are just 1/3 of the total number of savanna elephants. Okay, when you talk about the Asian elephant, especially the Indian elephant, we celebrate the World Elephant Day in 12th of August. And by the way, we were talking about the date, right? So why did we read about that MKS syndrome? Why were we reading about the syndrome? Because this date, 14th of November, is also the World Diabetes Day. So in order to increase awareness around it, we were reading about that article. Okay, now bringing you back into the elephants. So elephants are endangered. The Indian elephants are endangered in nature. Okay, we will also read two other facts with regards to India. First of all is which state has got the highest elephant population. So elephant census is still not out yet, but whatever has been known to us, we know that drastic changes in the numbers have been seen, and still the most number of elephants can be found in Karnataka and then Assam. So please remember these two facts, important for prelims. Then how many total reserves do we have for elephants? We have 33 elephant reserves. Are they available in all across the India? No, only across these states. Okay, so these states are important. Don't need to remember all the elephant reserves. The count is important. Can you please tell me which one of the following is the first established elephant reserve in India and which is the largest elephant reserve in India? Okay, so the students who have already answered it before, I also asked it, I think 1 month ago. So the students, I am not able to recall your name, but I really appreciate your effort. I've read all of your answers and they were actually correct. So please let me know the answer this time again. Fine. Now, what are the conservation efforts of India and of the international arena for conservation of elephants? So first of all is the Project Elephant 1992, where we have established elephant reserves, corridors. We also have got certain community participation in empowerment measures. For example, the Gaj Yatra program, the Gaj Shilpi initiative, and we also award people who are prominent conservationists and the organizations, the civil society organizations who are prominent conservationists of elephants. So we award them with Gaj Gaurav award, right? Next is the international ones. So we all know that elephants are migratory species, so they are included into the CMS list. And in that CMS list, Asian elephants come under Appendix 1, African forest elephant under Appendix 2. Okay, then we also have sites, because we know that they are also traded a lot, traded for their tusks, traded for the skin, and also for their organs. So the Convention on International Trade and Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which is CITES, they have also included both the elephants, Asian elephant and African elephants, into their appendix. Okay, then the MIKE program is also there to avoid and to monitor the illegal killing of the elephants. Now here they have also adopted a resolution 10.10 adopted at the Parties of Conference in 1997, where they said that MIKE program will be there in all the elephant related corridors, all the elephant landscapes of the world. So this is how we are trying to put up the conservation efforts. Now, one of the reasons why the African elephants are also getting endangered is not just poaching, but also taking this activity of catching elephants and killing them as one of the sports. A country, Botswana, which has the largest number of elephant population, it actually had a policy where it was inviting the Germans who used to historically hunt the elephants, and they used to then, in order to glorify themselves, put up their pictures, put up their tusks in their homes. So they used to call the Germans, they used to play with the elephants, finally kill them, and then export them off, right? So such practices are very prevalent in countries like Africa, who are taking their elephants for granted, but now it's a high time for them to realize, because they are also decreasing at alarming rate. Okay, so this for students all about today's analyst. Here is a PYQ question for you. You must also know that what is the gestation period for them and what is the normal calving time, and actually these questions can be solved using common sense as well if you try it a bit, right? On this note, I will end this session. It was great hosting it for you, and I hope you liked it as well. So thank you so much and have a nice day till we meet again. Bye.